In the ancient and weathered giant hall, a spirit array enveloped the area, within which violent spiritual energy raged like a storm. 9 giant dragons coiled in the void, emitting terrifying fluctuations that caused even the very space to tremble, as though it could not withstand their power. Under the gaze of these 9 dragons, Su Qingyin felt a chill run through her body. She looked up at Mu Chen, who stood outside the spirit array, his hands behind his back, a faint smile on his handsome face. However, this smile appeared especially piercing to Su Qingyin's eyes. Didn't expect you could get this far. Su Qingyin bit her red lips, speaking with some difficulty. Mu Chen's move had clearly shocked her deeply. Although she had been cautious of Mu Chen from the beginning, she never expected that his trump card would be this terrifying spirit array. Even now, she still couldn't believe that Mu Chen was controlling this array, for it was a master-level spirit array that even a top Earth Supreme could not contend with. How could someone like Mu Chen possibly master such a formation? Was he a spirit array Grandmaster? However, Mu Chen paid little attention to Su Qingyin's inner turmoil. He simply watched her and smiled again. Miss Su, could you help me restore the soul-slaughtering guards? Su Qingyin gave him a deep look, then smiled, her head slightly bowing. What are you saying, Brother Mu? I never intended to go back on my word. I will certainly do what I promised. Mu Chen gave no reply, merely gesturing for her to proceed. Su Qingyin turned around and extended her jade hand. The slumbering phoenix insect reappeared in her palm. She gazed at the exotic insect, a tinge of pity flashing in her eyes. The energy that could have greatly aided the phoenix insect's evolution and growth was now being forced out, which would clearly cause harm to the insect. Yet, with the terrifying spirit array bearing down on her, she had no choice but to proceed. Mu Chen was far too cunning. With a sigh in her heart, Su Qingyin no longer hesitated. She performed a series of hand seals, and finally, with a flick of her fingers, a bloodline shot out, directly striking the phoenix insect's body. The bloodline penetrated the insect's body, subtly forming a rune. The phoenix insect, still in slumber, suddenly emitted a sharp cry, filled with pain. Its body trembled, and then, waves of bloodlight erupted from it, flooding the entire giant hall. The bloodlight swept over the soul-slaughtering guards stationed at the rear of the hall. The bloodlight infiltrated the bodies of some of the guards, and Mu Chen soon sensed the fluctuation of power within them. Su Qingyin seemed to relax, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She turned back to Mu Chen with a smile. Brother Mu, I haven't failed you. However, despite her smile, Mu Chen remained expressionless, staring at her. Su Qingyin's smile on her delicate face slightly faded. Miss Su, out of 5,000 soul-slaughtering guards, you've only restored the power of 200. Even if some of them have been weakened for various reasons, it still shouldn't have been reduced to this extent, Mu Chen said lightly. From his earlier perception, he had only sensed the restoration of 200 guards. This number was far too small, and even with Mu Chen's control, they would not have much of an impact. Su Qingyin's delicate face changed. She had indeed held back, for these powers were also incredibly valuable to the phoenix insect. Once she broke through to the Earth Supreme level, refining these energies would surely enhance her own strength. Mu Chen stared at her, extending 2 fingers. Miss Su, my bottom line is 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards. If you can restore this number, I'll let you leave. You're insane. Su Qingyin's face changed as she shouted, 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards? That's far beyond what you can control. You'll never enjoy this fortune. Moreover, if she truly released 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards' energy, the phoenix insect's internal energy would almost be exhausted, which would be like cutting her heart out. Whether I can enjoy this fortune is my business, Mu Chen said calmly, still staring at her. Miss Su, you should be very clear about the phoenix insect's value. The reason you entered the ancient heavenly palace is probably to obtain it, and the energy within it never belonged to it. Why be so greedy? My bottom line is as such, and it won't change. Mu Chen spoke, then closed his eyes, clearly unwilling to continue bargaining. Based on his estimation, if he couldn't control the number of soul-slaughtering guards, it would be impossible to take the true body of the mandala out of that place. Su Qingyin looked at Mu Chen with his eyes closed, her silver teeth clenched in anger. However, seeing his demeanor, she knew that further words would be pointless. With a cold snort, she formed a seal with her jade-like hand. The phoenix insect let out a sharp cry again, and more blood-red light shot out as the bloodlight surged. The phoenix insect's previously bright body rapidly dimmed, making Su Qingyin's heart bleed. The bloodlight continued to pour into the bodies of the soul-slaughtering guards, and one by one, Their bodies began to regain their deep glow. That's enough. Chen opened his eyes at that moment. A smile returning to his face, he nodded at Su Qingyin and said, "Thank you." Upon hearing this, Su Qingyin immediately stopped the bloodlight from bursting out. She put away the phoenix insect, her beautiful face cold as she shot Chen a disdainful glance, and said, "Why not continue? There's still more to recover." Chen smiled slightly and replied, "Then it wouldn't be enjoyable anymore." 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards were already the real limit he could handle. "Like you can enjoy it right now," Su Qingyin snorted coldly. She clearly didn't think Chen could control these 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards. After all, this army was created by the second Hall Master, and the Earth Supreme that was killed back then probably numbered more than two, even though their vitality and intelligence had dissipated and their numbers greatly reduced, weakening their overall combat power. If Chen truly controlled them, they might still have a fighting chance. Even against a lower Earth Supreme. Chen smiled and ignored her. With a flick of his sleeve, the 9 dragons slaying Immortal array rippled, and an opening appeared again. Seeing this, Su Qingyin immediately rushed out. As she exited the spiritual array, Su Qingyin felt her tense body relax, then fixed her gaze on Chen, her eyes filled with hostility, still unable to swallow her anger. However, in the face of her fierce glare, Chen remained unbothered, merely smiling faintly as he locked eyes with her. When their gazes met, there seemed to be a subtle but terrifying spiritual energy emanating from them. Su Qingyin gripped the blood-red phoenix insect and, with a cold expression, said, "Without this spiritual array, how will you fight me now?" Chen smiled and said, "I probably wouldn't be able to defeat you." If Su Qingyin truly used the phoenix insect as a price, he might indeed suffer a major loss. Hearing Chen's response, Su Qingyin froze for a moment. Then her face softened slightly. Naturally, she wouldn't fully believe his words, as this guy was too cunning if it came down to a life-or-death battle. Even though she held the phoenix insect, Su Qingyin wasn't entirely confident that she could kill Chen. People like Chen, if not thoroughly eradicated, were better off not being made enemies. Otherwise, it would be difficult to have peace of mind. After all, someone like Xiaoyu, Chen had killed him just like that. The decisiveness of it even made Su Qingyin somewhat shaken. Therefore, a woman's intuition told her that it was best not to make an enemy of Chen if possible. "I helped Xiaoyu a bit earlier, so let's call it even this time." Su Qingyin's beautiful eyes shifted, but in the end, she withdrew her spiritual energy and coldly snorted. After some internal weighing, Su Qingyin made a firm decision. "Then thank you." Chen smiled. He didn't really mind Su Qingyin's previous interference with the 9 Nether. After all, if she really wanted to team up with Xiaoyu to deal with him, he probably wouldn't be able to kill Xiaoyu. So there was no need for him to hold a grudge over their small collaboration. Su Qingyin, hearing this, stopped lingering. She glanced at the soul-slaughtering guards in the giant hall and said, "For the sake of our cooperation, let me remind you, don't be too greedy. These soul-slaughtering guards are not so easy to control." After saying this, she turned and dashed out of the giant hall, her graceful figure quickly turning into light and vanishing. Chen watched Su Qingyin leave, but didn't stop her. After waiting for a while, he shifted his gaze to the soul-slaughtering guards. Deep within his black eyes, a burning intensity gradually began to rise if he could control this army. Even though he had not yet reached the Earth Supreme level, he would still possess the strength to fight against super-strong beings at that level. For him, this would undoubtedly be a leap in strength that time. Chen would truly join the ranks of the top powerhouses in the Tianluo continent. With this thought in mind, Chen took a deep breath, suppressing the restlessness in his heart, and stepped forward, entering the 9 dragons slaying Immortal array. He walked step by step toward the soul-slaughtering guards. Su Qingyin had already left with her treasure, and now, it was his turn to take control of the soul-slaughtering guards. Inside the ancient giant hall, Chen walked in. As he entered the 9 dragons slaying Immortal array, the 9 massive dragons that had been coiling around disappeared. The entire formation settled into calmness, offering no resistance to his entry in this unimpeded state. A few minutes later, Chen finally reached the throne, just as he was about to ascend the royal stone. steps, he saw that the soul-slaughtering guards, who had regained their strength, suddenly exhibited a glowing aura on their bodies. Then, they all took a step forward, and in an instant, the entire hall trembled that a terrifying sense of oppression swept through, like a giant dragon rushing toward Mu Chen. Feeling the pressure, Mu Chen's expression shifted slightly. He took a step back, stepping off the stone steps, and immediately, the oppressive force dissipated. The soul-slaughtering guards also retreated to their original positions. Even without intelligence, they are still guarding the second hall master. Mu Chen's gaze flickered. Previously, these guards had lost their power, which is why they didn't stop Su Qingyin. But now that they had regained their strength, it was only natural for them to instinctively fulfill their duty to protect the second hall master. If this had been the current situation earlier, if Su Qingyin had dared to step into the throne's domain, she would have immediately faced the destructive attacks of the 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards. Such a lucky woman, Mu Chen murmured. Then he didn't waste any more time. After a brief pause, he decisively took another step forward. Boom. In the hollow eyes of the 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards, it seemed that light was gathering. The overwhelming sense of oppression spread out once again, and this time, a blood-red glow faintly emanated from within them, a terrifying force gathering above them. It was the power of battle will. However, just as the horrifying battle will, comparable to that of an Earth Supreme, was about to converge, Mu Chen immediately took out a military token and raised it with one hand. The ancient, weathered military token lay quietly in Mu Chen's hand. At this moment, it seemed to be drawn by some force, slightly trembling, and from it came the faint sound of an ancient and distant horn. The sound echoed like it had crossed time and space, from the ancient past to the present. When the sound of the horn reverberated throughout the hall, the 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards, who were about to launch an attack, suddenly froze. Moments later, the terrifying battle will that had been gathering above them dissipated, and they stepped forward, kneeling on one knee in perfect unison toward Mu Chen. Since they had become undead soldiers, they had no intelligence and could not speak. But when they knelt, it felt as though space itself trembled. Mu Chen smiled upon seeing this. It seemed that even after countless years, even though these once mighty soul-slaughtering guards had turned into undead soldiers, the military token still worked. However, Mu Chen didn't rejoice for long. He quickly collected his emotions. He knew that the military token only granted him the qualification to control the soul-slaughtering guards, but it didn't mean he had the ability to command them in battle. If he couldn't unleash the full fighting power of the soul-slaughtering guards, even if he had them under his control, they would be nothing more than ornaments. Mu Chen's gaze flickered. Then he decisively stepped up the stone steps and walked to the side of the throne, overlooking the soul-slaughtering guards before sitting cross-legged. It had been some time since he had led an army into battle, but that didn't mean his skills as a battle formation master had stagnated. Just like his personal cultivation, his mastery in battle formations had deepened as his strength progressed. It was just that until now, there hadn't been an opportunity to showcase it. Now, it seemed like the perfect time to test the results of his year-long silent cultivation in battle formations. Mu Chen slowly closed his eyes. The next moment, he suddenly opened them again. But this time, his eyes had become somewhat crystal clear. A strange, powerful wave of energy swept through the void, rippling outward like water. The wave didn't seem to carry much destructive force, but as soon as it appeared, the soul-slaughtering guards, who had been kneeling on one knee, were affected. Bloodlight, almost solid in form, erupted from their eyes, and above their heads, crimson light gathered and spread like an endless sea, turning into thick blood clouds. These blood clouds piled on top of each other and swiftly engulfed the entire giant hall. A chilling aura emanated from the dense blood clouds, sending a cold shiver down Mu Chen's spine. These blood clouds were the manifestation of the soul-slaughtering guards' battle will, and the power they contained could only be described as terrifying. This was, by far, the strongest battle will Mu Chen had witnessed among the many armies he had seen over the years. Moreover, this was after numerous losses. It was unimaginable just how formidable the soul-slaughtering guards had been at their peak. The idea of annihilating an Earth Supreme was not mere talk. However, Mu Chen didn't retreat. Instead, His eyes gleamed with fiery excitement and anticipation. For any battle array master, encountering such an elite army would be an opportunity not easily passed up. It was like a master chef encountering top-tier ingredients, or a sculptor finding the finest materials that a battle array master, too, could only truly shine when they had an elite army at their disposal. Without an army, the title, Battle Array Master, would be nothing more than a joke. Chen took a deep breath, suppressing the surging emotions within him. Then, with a single hand, he formed a seal. The strange wave of energy sweeping from his body suddenly twisted in midair and formed countless lines that spread outward. From a distance, it looked like layers of dragon scales. Chen focused intently on those lines. These were the manifestations of battle runes. Although he hadn't yet fully mastered the battle will, Chen could sense how many battle runes he could currently condense. A year ago, Chen was just an ordinary 10,000 runes battle array master. But now, it was clear that he had grown significantly. The strange lines rapidly spread through the void, and in just a few breaths, they reached 100,000. 100,000 runes battle array master could rival a 9th grade supreme. However, even so, Chen's gaze remained calm. The 100,000 runes battle array master, once a figure he viewed with awe, no longer caught his attention. Moreover, if he could only condense 100,000 runes, there would be no point in trying to control the soul-slaughtering guards, as it would be impossible. Based on Chen's estimation, the former controller of this elite force, who had once wiped out Earth Supremes, must have been a battle array master with 1,000,000 runes. Even though the soul-slaughtering guards had been significantly weakened, Chen believed that to fully control them now, he would need at least 600,000 to 700,000 battle runes. 600,000 to 700,000 runes, huh? Chen muttered, his eyes growing even more crystal clear. His mental energy erupted from his brow, like a volcanic explosion. In midair, the condensed lines began to spread at an astonishing speed. In just a few moments, the light patterns expanded to a terrifying 40,000 runes. This was already an impressive number, but Chen furrowed his brows slightly. It was still not enough. Give me more. Chen seemed to shout in his mind, and at that moment, a vortex of crystal-like light flickered in his brow. All the mental energy in his body was being extracted at once. The number of battle runes in midair began to rise again. 43,000, 46,000, 50,000, 54,000. When the number reached 56,000, Chen's face grew pale. The intense pain in his head made it feel like his skull was being sawed open. This was a sign that his mental energy was on the verge of being exhausted. Just a little more. But Chen didn't give up. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to endure the pain, continuing to push forward. A sense of dizziness washed over him. Crystal-like light continuously poured from his eyes. Then, the once stagnant number of battle runes slowly began to rise once more. 58,000, 59,000, 60,000. When the number of battle runes finally reached 600,000, Chen suddenly felt the world spinning and his ears buzzing. However, he couldn't afford to pay attention to these sensations. Taking a deep breath, he focused his mind, and immediately, the 600,000 battle runes in midair transformed into a mighty torrent, sweeping through and crashing into the thick blood clouds formed above the soul-slaughtering guards. Only by experiencing the battle will of the soul-slaughtering guards could he gain true recognition and fully unleash the battle will of this army. Boom. As Chen's mental energy surged into the dense blood clouds, he immediately sensed a change in the surroundings. It seemed to be an ancient battlefield, engulfed in war flames. Just as he was slightly stunned by the sudden change, he suddenly realized that terrifying power waves had erupted around him, howling like a storm. He hurriedly looked up and felt a shock run through him. The sky around him was filled with thousands of armies floating in midair, completely surrounding him. These armies were clad in heavy armor, their bodies surrounded by a blood-red aura. The endless battle will of blood swept through the void, making space itself fragile and brittle under such immense power. Chen stared at the terrifying army, his pupils narrowing. He realized that this was none other than the soul-slaughtering guards, the most complete and powerful version of them. What shocked Chen even more was that he appeared to have undergone a drastic transformation. Instead of his youthful appearance, he now had an elderly face. But within this aged body, an incredibly terrifying spiritual energy erupted. Such power could only belong to someone who had reached the Earth Supreme level. Chen froze for a moment, then suddenly realized that the owner of this old body was likely one of the Earth Supremes who had been killed by the soul-slaughtering guards in the past. Boom. As Chen came to this realization, the soul-slaughtering guards around him launched their attack. Instantly, a million beams of blood-red light swept across, carrying the force of destruction as they fiercely collided with his mental energy. Sensing the terrifying nature of the attack, Chen's scalp tingled in fear. Boom, boom. Above the battlefield, an unimaginable battle will spread across the sky. The million beams of bloodlight surged, each beam radiating a power so immense that Chen's mind trembled. If his true self were here, he would undoubtedly be annihilated without a trace. Was this the full strength of the soul-slaughtering guards at their peak? Bang! The space shattered, and in the moment Chen was stunned. The destructive bloodlight of battle will howled toward him, striking heavily against his body. The moment he was struck, it felt as if a terrible pain surged from the depths of his soul, causing him to scream in agony. The attack was so horrific that it even gave him the illusion that he was about to be truly destroyed. Boom, boom, the sky, tens of thousands of miles high, seemed to shatter at that instant, countless rifts in space spreading out. Chen then saw his elderly body being shattered by the force of the attack. That once Earth Supreme had perished under the soul-slaughtering guards' onslaught. As darkness crept in, Chen's mind seemed to be undergoing some terrifying cleansing, bringing unimaginable pain that nearly drove him insane. However, just as Chen was about to collapse, the intense pain finally dissipated. Then, he noticed that the scenery around him was changing again. But now, the army surrounding him still wore heavy armor and exuded an aura that could swallow the heavens. His body had shifted from an old one to a middle-aged appearance. The difference was that within this middle-aged body, there still lingered terrifying power. Clearly, he was also at the Earth Supreme level. Seeing this scene, Chen vaguely understood. These illusion-like visions were perhaps the Earth Supremes that the soul-slaughtering guards had once subdued. And now, was he about to experience the fall of these Earth Supremes one by one? As this thought crossed his mind, Chen felt a bitter taste in his mouth. The agonizing pain he had just endured was impossible to forget. For anyone with a fragile mind, it would likely be enough to drive them mad after just one experience. Nevertheless, Chen also realized that after undergoing these repeated cleansings and destructions by the soul-slaughtering guards' battle will, he had gradually begun to resonate with their battle will. So, this should be a test from the soul-slaughtering guards' battle will. As long as he can endure it, he will be able to truly unleash the power of the soul-slaughtering guards with the military token. Since that's the case, then bring it on. Chen gritted his teeth, loosening his tense body. At this moment, any defense would be ineffective. Since that's the case, he might as well fully experience the destructive battle will of the soul-slaughtering guards. Boom. The sky was filled with boundless bloodlight, converging like a blood-red sun, suddenly falling and crashing violently onto Chen's body. The excruciating pain, as if he were about to be destroyed, surged once again, flooding Chen's mind. Boom, boom. Over the following moments, Chen began to experience one destruction after another. By the end, the pain had penetrated deep into his bones, almost numbing him. Chen went through this destruction a total of 8 times. This meant that there had been 8 Earth Supremes who had perished at the hands of the soul-slaughtering guards. This made Chen feel a chill in his heart. He knew all too well how difficult it was to truly destroy an Earth Supreme. Even if such a being could be defeated by an elite army, there were still many methods for them to escape. Yet, the 8 Earth Supremes had failed to escape and were completely obliterated. From this, it could be seen how fierce the soul-slaughtering guards had been at their peak. As Chen sighed deeply in his heart. He also breathed a sigh of relief when he noticed that after enduring the 8th destruction of the soul-slaughtering guards' battle will, this space finally began to crack. Chen's consciousness swiftly returned at this moment. Puff. In the giant hall, Chen, with his tightly shut eyes, suddenly opened them wide. Then, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The veins on his forehead were bulging, making his handsome face look somewhat ferocious. The previous excruciating pain also descended upon his physical body as his consciousness returned. Huff, huff, Chen gasped for air. After a long while, his clenched fists slowly began to relax. Trembling, he touched his forehead and couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. The repeated destruction from the battle had truly left him with lingering fear. However, Because of this, he now had a clearer sense of the soul-slaughtering guard's battle will, its ferocity and dominance. Those were Earth Supremes, and yet, they had been suppressed and annihilated by them, 8 in total. Such battle will, if it were present in today's Tianluo continent, would likely make any top-tier force shudder in fear. But what brought Mu Chen some joy was that, after enduring the overwhelming battle will, he had finally made it through. Now, he could faintly feel a subtle connection between him and the soul-slaughtering guards. Moreover, Mu Chen's hand, which had been touching his forehead, suddenly paused. His eyes were filled with disbelief. At this moment, he suddenly realized that his consciousness was rapidly growing stronger, like a rising tide. Mu Chen's eyes became clearer, and strange light radiated from them. His thoughts swept across, and they transformed into layers upon layers of battle runes in mid-air. The number of these runes had surprisingly surpassed 750,000. 750,000 battle runes. Mu Chen's mouth opened slightly in shock. In just a few minutes, why had the number of battle runes he had condensed increased to this extent? Is it because of the soul-slaughtering guard's battle will? Mu Chen quickly understood. It was definitely the battle will he had endured earlier. Though it had brought unimaginable pain, it had evidently given him unimaginable rewards in return. It had directly increased his battle runes by 150,000. If Mu Chen had been cultivating, it would have taken him nearly half a year to achieve this, and that was only because of his extraordinary talent. But now, that half year of work had been compressed into a mere few minutes. A wave of joy surged in Mu Chen's heart. He grinned widely, knowing that with his current mental strength and the assistance of the military token, the soul-slaughtering guards would truly shine in his hands. As soon as he thought about the fact that the soul-slaughtering guards before him would be at his command, his heart surged with excitement. With this army, even though he had not yet reached the Earth Supreme realm, he would have the strength to challenge a true lower Earth Supreme if he encountered one. To challenge an Earth Supreme. Mu Chen tightly pressed his lips together. In that moment, even he couldn't help but be moved, recalling how, in the past, the Earth Supreme had been an existence so lofty and unattainable in his eyes. He had always been striving toward that realm, and now, he had finally obtained the power of that realm. Although he relied on the soul-slaughtering guards as a battle formation master, he knew full well that they and the army were one and the same. Only when the two came together could they truly unleash their full power. Neither could be missing. Mu Chen rose from the stone steps and gazed at the army before him, draped in heavy armor, exuding an overwhelming aura. He raised the military token, and a flash of light flickered on it, ready to summon the soul-slaughtering guards. Inside the military token was a small space, capable of bringing the soul-slaughtering guards into it. However, the prerequisite was that the soul-slaughtering guards had to already be turned into undead soldiers with no life remaining. The light from the token wrapped around the bodies of the soul-slaughtering guards, but as it pulled them in, Mu Chen felt a faint resistance. Mu Chen froze for a moment. That resistance seemed to stem from a lingering obsession. These soul-slaughtering guards didn't want to leave. They were determined to stay and guard this place even after death. This change surprised Mu Chen. His brows furrowed slightly. If he couldn't take the soul-slaughtering guards, his mission would be in vain. He clearly wouldn't allow such a situation to unfold. An obsession, Mu Chen muttered to himself. After a brief silence, he suddenly turned and looked toward the figure of the second hall master. Then, he walked up to him, slightly bent, and respectfully performed a gesture of a younger generation, senior. The brilliance of the soul-slaughtering guards should not be covered by dust here. I am willing to lead them, and, in the future, fight to the death with the extraterritorial evil clan. Therefore, I humbly ask for your permission. Mu Chen's voice echoed through the grand hall, followed by a long silence. He raised his head and gazed at the second hall master's face. In that instant, it seemed as though he saw the hall master's chin, as still as a statue, subtly nodding. It felt like an illusion, but not entirely. From a certain perspective, it was probably a reflection of the second hall master's lingering obsession. Boom. Behind him, the soul-slaughtering guards knelt on one knee, their bodies and instincts compelling them to do so. This time, they were not bowing to the military token, but to the second hall master. At this moment, Mu Chen noticed that the lingering obsession around the soul-slaughtering guards quietly dissipated. He let out a quiet sigh of relief. As expected, to take the soul-slaughtering guards, he needed not just the military token, but also the approval of the second hall master. He once again bowed to the second hall master, then raised the military token. A ring of light emitted from it, and instantly, the 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards were transformed into beams of light, soaring into the sky, before ultimately being absorbed into the military token. When the last beam of light entered the token, Chen carefully put it away, then without hesitation, turned and headed for the Grand Hall's exit. The soul-slaughtering guards were now his. Next, he would need to retrieve the true body of the mandala. After leaving the second hall, Chen did not pause for a moment, heading straight for the first hall. The various powerful figures that had entered the 5 halls region had been scattered, so he needed to reach the first hall quickly. Although he wasn't worried that others had the ability to enter the Grand Hall where the mandala's true body lay, if someone disturbed the guardian spirit array there, retrieving the mandala's true body would become much more complicated and troublesome. Thus, as he made his way, even when Chen passed by some broken halls with faint spiritual light emanating from them, he didn't stop or investigate. He knew those spiritual lights were probably treasures left behind from the ancient heavenly palace. But he simply didn't have the time for them right now. He had to quickly secure the true body of the mandala to ensure his safety. Otherwise, once the prominent figures from Tianluo continent arrived, considering his grudge with Xiaoyu, Xia Emperor would definitely hate him to the core. To survive under the reign of the Xia Emperor and the Sacred Demon Emperor, who already held a deep grudge against mandala, one must merge with the mandala and break through to the realm of perfect Earth Supreme. Otherwise, even with the soul-slaughtering guards in hand, it would be impossible to contend with a high Earth Supreme. Time is running out. Chen muttered to himself before his figure transformed into a streak of light, soaring across the sky. As his gaze stretched forward, it suddenly froze. At the far end of his sight, a vast azure sea appeared. The sea was turbulent, with towering waves rising and crashing periodically. This direction indeed leads to the first hall. Could the first hall be located on the sea? Chen was taken aback at this sight. After a brief moment of contemplation, he decisively pressed on. His figure zipped through the air, leaving behind a deep white wave that lingered in its wake. After several minutes of traversing over the sea, Chen saw a series of islands emerging, each with towering palaces, signifying the former prosperity and power of this place. Occasionally, streaks of light could be seen darting across the islands. Clearly, other powerful individuals were exploring the first hall for treasures. However, Chen paid them no heed and continued his high-speed journey, heading deeper into the SEA. As he ventured further, Chen began to detect traces of spiritual arrays scattered across the surroundings. These traces radiated an immense and terrifying power, but fortunately, all of these formidable arrays had been destroyed during the Great Battle many years ago. Otherwise, dealing with these arrays alone would have consumed much of Chen's time. Swish, Chen's figure streaked across the sky as his gaze scanned the palaces on each island. He continuously searched, trying to find the palace that housed mandala's main body. His search continued for almost an hour. As time passed, Chen furrowed his brows. By now, he had scoured nearly 3/4 of the islands in this vast ocean. Some of the palaces did indeed emit strange spiritual energy fluctuations, but they did not match the impression he had of mandala's main body, indicating that they were not the right ones. Let me search a bit more. Chen gritted his teeth and moved toward the last unexamined area. However, half an hour later, his expression darkened. Hovering over the sea, Chen had almost explored the entire ocean, but he still could not find the palace from his memory. The palace I saw earlier couldn't have been an illusion. His face was solemn, and he suppressed the rising frustration within him, trying to calm his mind. But why can't I find it on the sea? Also, I haven't seen the first hall master's residence. Chen pressed his lips together tightly. He scanned the ocean and muttered to himself, could it be that it's not on the sea? If it's not on the sea, then where could it be? Chen lowered his gaze to the turbulent sea surface, pausing in silence for a moment. His eyes suddenly sharpened. If it's not on the sea, could it be beneath the sea? Swish. Chen's figure almost instantly transformed into a streak of light, plunging down into the sea. Once submerged, his spiritual energy spread out, and soon, he saw towering, majestic palaces, like colossal beasts, lying deep beneath the sea. Upon seeing this, Chen let out a sigh of relief. The true first hall was beneath the sea, not on the surface. The first hall master's preferences were indeed strange. Whoosh. Chen's figure sliced through the water like a fish, his spiritual energy spreading once again. This time, his search finally yielded results. I found you. Chen's figure appeared before an ancient, sunken ruin on the sea floor. Behind the ruins, a broken but ancient palace stood. The appearance of this palace was identical to the one he had seen earlier. In the depths of the palace, a faint, peculiar fragrance seemed to emanate, intoxicating anyone who inhaled it. It was the scent of flowers, mandala flowers. Chen gazed at the broken palace, finally exhaling in relief. He cautiously approached the ruins, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. Within the palace, shielded from the corrosion of the sea, the interior was grand and vast. It seemed that, in the ancient era, this had once been a significant place within the first hall. The interior of the Grand Hall was also in ruins, clearly having experienced an exceptionally fierce battle. Exposed bones lay around, revealing the brutal and bloody conflict that had once occurred. Chen's gaze swept across the hall. In the next instant, his expression suddenly changed. He abruptly raised his head and looked toward the far end of the hall, where there was a stone door. Beyond that stone door was most likely the place where the mandala's true form resided. However, Chen didn't focus on that for now, because he noticed two figures standing in front of the stone door. One of those figures was extremely familiar to Chen. It was Garuda from the Sacred Demon Palace. At this moment, Garuda stood with his arms crossed, a mocking expression on his face as he stared at Chen. Why was Garuda here? Chen's face immediately turned grim, given Garuda's stance. It was clear he had been waiting here for some time. It seems the palace master was right after all, Garuda said with a grin, looking at Chen. Someone was bound to come to retrieve her true form when the ancient heavenly palace opened, but I didn't expect it to be you. Garuda continued, in that case, the domain lord of your great Luo heaven domain must be the palace master's great enemy, huh? He's done a good job hiding, it seems. Mandala's avatar, transformed into a young bud, should be quite different from her true form, so even the Sacred Demon Palace had been unable to detect it before, but now, after seeing Chen here, Garuda clearly understood. Chen stared at Garuda, his previously grim expression slowly relaxing. The Sacred Demon Emperor must have known about this place. After all, it was he who had forced Mandala's true form to hide here. Clearly, he didn't want to see Mandala reclaim her true form and break through to a new level of strength. Therefore, whenever Mandala tried to recover her true form, Lu Heng would certainly use various means to hinder her. Now, it seemed that Garuda was here on orders. However, if it was only Garuda, Chen wouldn't be the slightest bit afraid. But clearly, the situation wasn't that simple. Chen's gaze shifted to the shadowed side of Garuda, where another figure stood. This person wore a black and white robe and appeared somewhat aged. But there was no spiritual energy fluctuation around him. It was precisely because of this that Chen felt a sense of danger. He didn't believe someone so weak could have passed through the many defenses to come here. Noticing Chen's gaze, Garuda smiled lightly. I had originally planned to have a real battle with you to see whose great son indestructible body would triumph. But it seems you don't have that chance anymore. After speaking, Garuda turned to the man in the black and white robe, bowing slightly and speaking respectfully. Elder Zhua, this place is in your hands now. The palace master has said he doesn't want anyone entering this grand hall. Elder Zhua. Seeing Garuda's respectful attitude, Chen's pupils constricted. He then looked at the man in the black and white robe in disbelief. Could it be that this person was an elder of the Sacred Demon Palace? To be entrusted with such an important task, and for Garuda to lower himself before this man. It was clear that this elder's power had to have reached the Earth Supreme level. But wasn't it said that no Earth Supreme level experts could enter the ancient Heavenly Palace? How could this elder from the Sacred Demon Palace sneak in without anyone noticing? Furthermore, he had never shown himself, not even in the Heavenly River. Is it that surprising? Garuda laughed again when he saw the shock in Chen's expression. As for the ancient Heavenly Palace, it indeed cannot accommodate Earth's Supreme level experts. That's why our Sacred Demon Palace paid a heavy price to allow Elder Zhua to secretly enter. Even so, he only has one opportunity to act, and his strength has been greatly diminished. It will take decades, or even longer, for him to recover. Garuda seemed to take pleasure in Chen's shock, so he continued speaking. Chen's eyelids twitched. The Sacred Demon Emperor was truly ruthless. To prevent Mandala from retrieving her true form, he was willing to let one of his lower Earth Supremes pay such a heavy price. However, Garuda's words did ease Chen's tension a bit. Clearly, this elder from the Sacred Demon Palace was not at his peak strength and had been severely weakened. For a lower Earth Supreme, even if most of their strength has been lost, they are still definitely not something a perfect ninth grade could contend with. Therefore, when Mu Chen walked into this place, in Garuda's eyes, he was already a dead man. However, what he could not have expected was that at this moment, Mu Chen was no longer within the scope of what could be defined by the so-called perfect ninth grade Daso. Just as Garuda was about to enjoy seeing the fear and astonishment that would soon appear on Mu Chen's face, his eyes narrowed slightly as he saw a faint curve seemingly appear on Mu Chen's handsome face, that a low chuckle, almost a murmur, quietly echoed in the grand hall beneath the sea. So it turns out to be a lower Earth Supreme in a semi-disabled state.